In 2015, I went to a conference called MLC Connect, and it was a conference for sports creatives. It was the world I was selling into at the time.
Yep.
And I remember meeting this guy, Adam Martin, super cool dude. He had this podcast called Makers of Sport. And he's like, hey, Brian, you should definitely do a podcast. And he gave me ideas and thoughts or whatever. And I said, cool, man, I'm going to launch a podcast. I'll let you know when it launches. I saw him a year later at the same conference in 2016. Of course, I hadn't launched a podcast yet. So I'm, tail between my legs. So I'm like, oh, this is the year though. I know I had a lot of stuff going on and whatever. A whole nother year goes by. So now I see him at the same conference in 2017 as the summer. So 2 years have gone by and I'm like, he's like, Brian, you start that podcast? No, I didn't do it again. Excuses fly in and all that. But I did tell, but again, as you know, it's easy to fast forward 1 or 2 years, but a lot had happened in my life. I had gained a lot more confidence. I had been doing some other things. And I told him, I said, Adam, this is the year. I'm going to start the podcast and you're going to be a guest on it. And he's like, okay. And I remember leaving that conference because I'd thought about, do I do it? I'm a big 49ers fan. Maybe I'll do a podcast on the 49ers or golf or something. And one day it just hit me. It's like, there's got to be people that are just like you, that are fearful to do something, that have been held back because of the beliefs of others or no confidence or anything like that. You just got to get started. And I remember saying it to myself like that. It was kind of that moment. I was like, just get started. Maybe that might be the podcast. Yeah, that's the podcast. Yeah. And by the way, this is where, remember I talked about the Gary Vee thing in 2011. I had entrepreneurship had become a lot more important in my life. It's something I researched a lot more. I listen to podcasts on it. So I said, maybe I'll interview founders, CEOs, whatever, entrepreneurs. And this way they can tell their stories of how they got started.
Yeah.
So it's a free MBA for me, right? And that's also to help people that maybe just behind me get started as well. And I could be the one that kind of reaches out and shares that message. So that's what I did. I started in November of 2017. And, I think, I don't know the exact number, 450-ish right now. And probably 325 interviews plus. I did a lot of solo episodes that I didn't put numbers on early on. So that's why the numbers look a little different. But yeah, it's been almost 7 years, man. It's been a journey.
I think so many people can relate to the 2 years later, I ran into that person again and still hadn't done the thing that I said I was going to do.
Yeah.
I know I've been there many times, and I think that it's important for people to hear that part, because it's okay if you're listening and you've been there, done that, because there's still an opportunity to start. You could have sat there, kicked yourself a whole bunch of times for not having started 2 years earlier. But here you were, and you just said, screw this, let's start.
My first children's book that I wrote probably 60, 70% of, I wrote that when my son was born in 2012. But I didn't publish it until 2021 because I wasn't a children's book author. I didn't think I could write. I didn't think anything. I had zero confidence. I didn't have support systems. I didn't have anything like that. So the Just Get Started podcast was probably the big moment that really sparked this change in my life. Although there were some moments prior to that, kind of had some hints, but it was really the podcast. And then from there, it was just like, what can I do? And figuring kind of out, and this is something I would encourage everyone. I have on my mirror, my bathroom wall, I have a question that says, why can't it be you? And when I feel down or I feel like maybe I shouldn't do this project, I always go back and I look at that and I say it over and over. Why can't it be you? Like, why is someone else more qualified to do whatever you think you shouldn't be doing? And most of the time, actually all the time, the answer is, of course, no one else is as qualified, because I'm going to give a unique spin on it. And the way that I was brought up and all my history that I have, I'm going to put in it the emphasis and the energy that I want. So why not do it? And what's the worst that happens? Because years ago, it was always, well, what's, so-and-so going to say about it, right? Who's going to laugh at me if I do it? Now it's like, I don't care. I mean, I certainly care what some people think, right? But for the most part, I don't really care what people think, because I know that a lot of times it's probably like, my God, I wish I was doing something like Brian. Maybe I should just start. And that's because as I said, the reason the podcast started is the same reason I still do it today. I want to give someone else that confidence, that spark that they could go out and get started and do whatever the hell they want because they can. And if they see me doing it or one of the guests on and they're like, well, maybe I should give it a try, then hell, I've done my job. I always fall in this trap of like, I just need more time. You don't need more time, really. You need execution. I wish I knew that a longer time ago, but I didn't. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, we always see the finished product. We see the published book or we see the thriving business, and we don't know the story of, the author that ripped up, the first 10 chapters and had to rewrite it. Like, we don't see that at all.
Yeah.
And that doesn't get and that's why I love doing the podcast, because I love sharing those stories. James Clear has a simple thing that I always love is action creates mood.
Yes.
Because we used to always have the other way. I need motivation and now I'm going to go to the gym. But the reality is, no, show up to the gym and that'll actually, kind of build the cycle and give you energy and actually want you to do more. So this, whether it's starting a podcast or anything, it's create an action first. The refinement is what's important once you do start. But if you never take that step, as you mentioned, and again, I know very well, if you don't take the step, there's no chance to refine it. So why are we even talking about that? Let's take the first step first. I don't care if it's messy.
Yeah.
And then we start smoothing out. But you can't smooth out until you actually take the first step or two.
I used to say this to my math students because they would get stuck and they couldn't even put the pencil down on the paper to start the problem because they were like, I don't know how to get the answer. I go, I didn't ask you if you know how to get the answer. I said, where do you want to start? Because I know once we get started, we can play with this thing. We can massage it, we can tweak it, we can adjust it until we get it. But I never asked you if you know how to solve this problem or completely. I know once we start, we can start refining. And I think that's so key. And that's, to your point, people are probably like, oh, Brian, I know you always say just get started and all of that. But here it is. I think that's the key right there. If you don't start, you can't even start tweaking. Can't fix anything if you didn't start.
Yeah. And that all comes, these are all the little things of like building the right systems in place to stay consistent and to have control of your daily decisions. There's all that comes into play, but at least take a step forward into the unknown. I think that's where I heard this great quote the other day. People would rather be unhappy than uncertain. And it really hit home because I'm like, I think there's a lot of truth to that. Someone would rather be a little unhappy than go into the unknown. So, but all the great stuff comes from going to the unknown.
Yes.
All the stuff we know or don't know yet, but comes from the unknown and trying.